Welcome, Vanakkam, Swagatham. In this video, I try to explain my understanding of church as the body of Christ through three Welsonian parables. Sorry if I sound a bit presumptuous. Don't look for the word Welsonian in the dictionary, it doesn't exist. Welsonian is the adjective of Welson, which happens to be my first name. So I'm going to explain the idea of the church as the body of Jesus Christ, as I understand it, through three Welsonian parables. Let's get started. Before we get started, let me make a request. All of you are members. If you happen to be Christians, a good number of the members of this YouTube fellowship are not Christians. I value their presence equally. I make no distinction based on religion between human beings. In fact, I would like to make no distinction whatsoever. I would like to value, welcome, respect, cherish, love everyone like members of the same family. Let's get started. So if you're members of a church, please show this video. I'll make it as brief as I can to your pastors or priests or presbyters or vicars or fathers, whichever terminology you use. Just as Jesus taught through parables in order to make it easier and difficult, that's the interesting thing. In order to make it easier as well as difficult for people to understand his meanings, let me also use the parabolic method. That's why I'm using three parables, parables that occur to me as particularly relevant to the theme that we are trying to develop. The first parable is what I call the parable of the painter. The parable of the painter. Now, suppose you are a painter. You have the canvas, you have the paint box, you have the brushes of various description, and you have a particular image of beauty in your mind. And you want to paint a picture. You want to project that inner image of beauty to the external world to make it visible to others so that they can also enjoy it. Now, what do? You mix or use individual colors or mixed colors precisely according to the proportion and the spatiality of the colors required. Now, suppose you are painting the portrait of a human being, right? You have to be absolutely precise and you have to ensure that each stroke of your brush is in the right place and the choice of colors is accurate and as faithful to the original as possible. Now, suppose you paint one half of my face in fair complexion and the other in dark complexion. You may have otherwise done a perfect job, but it's not my portrait. So, when you paint a picture, if you're a painter, it's not enough that you have all the colors. It's not enough that you use all the colors. It is necessary that you use the right colors in the right place, in the right shade, in the right proportion, right amount, and within the right framework, the right outline. Now, if you paint my ear to the extent that it stretches beyond my shoulder, then it's not my portrait. So, in other words, everything has to gel together within a total idea of the shape, the complexion, the texture of my face. So, you don't create a portrait merely by throwing colors together. You buy the best paints, the best brushes, use the best canvas, and you throw things together. You don't get a portrait, you don't get a picture. So, for a painter, to create a picture which carries any value at all, he has to ensure that everything gels together, which means that he has to have an idea of the total entity in his mind even before he starts. Number two, he has to have an idea as to how every dot, every micro dot fits in within that framework. He has to know which particular shade to use, to what extent. Everything therefore blends together in order to create this object of beauty. And nothing can be added, nothing can be subtracted to that particular image of beauty that the painter creates. This is my first parable. So just remember this much: a painter, by simply throwing colors together, making sure that all colors are included, does not create a valuable picture or a portrait, or uh, the picture of a scenery. Now let me go to my second parable, the parable of a poet. First was the parable of a painter. Now we come to the parable of a poet. In my younger days, when I was quite immature, well, more immature than I am, even though I'm immature, I don't claim any maturity. When I was immature, when I was young, when I was in college, I I used to attempt writing poems. I thought I was a fairly good poet. But when I started reading great poets, when I began to understand the something of the mystery of their beauty, then I realized what a poor prospect I was, so I gave up writing poems altogether. But I have some idea about writing poems. So this parable is based on my actual experience of writing poems, and particularly my knowledge of how not to write poems. Okay? Now, a poet does not create a poem simply by throwing words together. He looks for the best words, the most beautiful words, the words that are likely to be loved by people, and brings all of them together. He doesn't succeed in creating a poem. Like in the case of the painter that I talked about a while ago, the case of the poet also, he has to make sure that the right words are used in the right place, in the right manner, with the right metrical arrangement within the overall shape of the poem. Simply by bringing together various words that he likes or words that he thinks are poetic, he doesn't succeed in writing a poem. My third parable is the parable of a cook, a housewife, if you like. All right. Okay. The parable of a housewife. Now, suppose your wife or my wife uh, is cooking or making a chapati in the kitchen. She doesn't succeed in making a good chapati by bringing all the ingredients together in a kind of arbitrary, mechanical, quantitative manner. See, equal quantities of atta, water, salt, oil. You may create something that resembles a chapati, but you will die if you eat it. So it's not enough that all ingredients are there. It is necessary that the right proportion, the right sense of internal relationship, the right idea of the whole thing, the total entity, the final outcome, everything is kept together in one's mind, and the parts are adjusted to the total outcome in order that the effort to the housewife actually results in the creation of an edible chapati. So these are the three parables: the parable of a painter, the parable of a poet, the parable of a housewife. Now, how does this connect to the idea of the church? See, when church is understood in purely administrative terms as well as quantitative terms, and when priesthood is understood in terms of carrying out a certain designated or prescribed number of priestly functions, what happens really is similar to a painter throwing together all his colors in a kind of random manner. Green has to be used, as I have used green. Red has to be used, as I've used red also. Blue, green, orange, all these colors. Yes, yes, I've used all of them. But where is the picture? There is no picture. There is no portrait. There is no creation of beauty. So also in the case of the poet, so also in the case of the housewife. So if the priest has a quantitative, mechanical, administrative idea of the church, what he will do is he will merely adhere to the faithful discharging of or carrying out of certain prescribed functions, priestly functions. A priest has a rough idea as to what all would comprise his priestly activities, responsibilities. There should be parish visitations, there should be area prayer, there should be women's fellowship, once in a while there should be youth fellowship, and if possible there should be Sunday schools, there should be Sunday worship, and there must be an annual convention, Passion Week services, so on and so forth. These are all the various ingredients. And he will make sure that all these things are there, nothing is missed. But the fact that everything is included does not mean that it is a church. That's where the most terrible mistake happens. If you understand the church as a club, church as a worldly establishment or institution, then this is fine. But the moment you shift your understanding from the worldly idea of an institution or a club to the spiritual idea of church as the body of Jesus Christ, then there is a serious problem. And it's because we don't have the benchmark of what constitutes church as the body of Christ that we are quite happy to put up with anything. So often when I criticize, when I point out that there are certain deficiencies and lacunae, many people get upset because they don't have an idea of what it means to believe that church is the body of Jesus Christ. Now think of your body. Is not your body a piece of marble? Is not every cell in the right place, functioning in the right manner, to the right shade of its capacity? And is not everything working in tune with the total entity called you? Suppose your left leg is 1 foot longer than the right leg. Will you be able to walk? Suppose you have 3 hands instead of 2. Will you be able to function? And function, if you are able to function, how effectively? Suppose you have only one eye, or one eye looks in one direction and the other looks in another direction. What happens to you? So, the idea that the church is a body, which is an organic image, carries with it definite meanings, definite implications, and definite discipline. And because we are all living in a world which is mechanical, which lacks this organic cohesion, sense of being intimately integrated so that every member, every part of the whole reinforces each other and everything together constitutes one coherent, beautiful, fruitful whole totality. We are happy so long as certain familiar routines, church routines are repeated. For example, Sunday service, it must begin in a certain manner. It must have 4 or 5 hymns. There must be 3 readings, one from the Old Testament, one from the book of Psalms, one from the New Testament, or maybe one from the Old Testament, one from one of the epistles, one from the Gospel. Then there must definitely be a sermon. And then there must be the celebration of the Holy Communion. So this is a formula, this is a liturgical formula. And the priest is terribly wrong in assuming that as long as he ensures that all items of this liturgical formula are preserved, are repeated week after week after week, it constitutes worship. It doesn't. This is not what I'm saying. This is what Jesus said. When Jesus said to the Samaritan woman, God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. What it means by saying spirit and truth is this idea of church as the body of Christ. Only when the collective worship experienced and offered by a congregation as a whole, becomes an activity undertaken by church as the body of Christ, will it become true worship? Nothing becomes true worship because it is organized within a church according in strict compliance with the tradition of a particular denominational church, presided over by a priest, or if you're lucky, a methran. That's not the idea of worship at all. It is nothing. It's nothing compared to compared to Jesus's idea of worship. All this was happening at the time of Jesus Christ, both in the case of the Samaritans and the case of the Jews. To Jesus, it did not come anywhere near true worship. It's very obvious. But in 2000 years, we have not even bothered to understand the difference. So, we have to make sure that what we are offering is true worship. Now, one hallmark of true worship, or the effect of true worship, is that it caters to our need to grow spiritually. And the proof that we are growing spiritually is that our life becomes spiritually fruitful. And you cannot miss the emphasis on being fruitful, or emphasis on being fruitful as the authentic hallmark of spiritual life from the teachings of Jesus Christ. From start to finish, he's emphasizing the same thing. If you're spiritual, you'll be fruitful. That's why he says, if you abide in me and I in you, you will produce much fruit. Now, in our case, it's enough that we go through this motion of offering Sunday worship, and no further question is asked. No one is bothered about what should be the ideal effect of this experience of worshipping God in spirit and truth, or even what it means to worship God in spirit and truth. No one is really keen to find out what it means for the church to be the body of Jesus Christ. We have a certain idea of church, and I don't have to tell you what that idea is. I don't have to waste your time repeating the all too known and familiar. This is not the idea of church that can be maintained even for a minute if you go by biblical principles. So that's why I'm requesting all of you, if you care for your church, if you really desire that your church should become truly the body of Christ, please show this video to your priest and politely, humbly, respectfully request them to see it with open minds, so that they have some benchmark by which to measure the idea and practice of priesthood that is in vogue today. The outcome can only be beneficial, and that's precisely my intention. Now, let's consider a very practical thing. In Kerala, for example, people are particularly health conscious, and one aspect of being health conscious is people look for the best hospital, the best doctor, and the latest medical technology. People are extremely keen to secure for themselves the best medical care available in the market. And how do you know whether the medical care that you get is good or not? In terms of whether or not you are healed. If from a hospital, what you see is a daily procession of dead bodies, people brought in there with a certain degree of health, but being taken back with all their problems ended, then it's extremely unlikely that you would want to be treated. There's a story of a surgeon who used to boast that his success rate was 1%. At least 1% succeeded, escaped. So a patient to be operated upon went to him, and he was understandably very nervous. He asked the surgeon, "Doctor, will I survive?" Doctor said, "Yes, of course you will survive, because my success rate is 1%. I've already killed 99. You are the 100th. Therefore, you will survive." Now, that is a logic which sounds all right, only in terms of the sound value, but in terms of its actual experiential value, it is stupid. Unfortunately, this is a kind of logic that prevails in our midst. No one wants to find out what it means for a church to be the body of Jesus Christ. No one wants to find out what constitutes true worship, worshipping God, the living God in spirit and in truth. But everybody wants to worship, and everybody wants to believe that by repeating this mechanical exercise of worshipping God day after day in this manner, the precise, soulless, soul deadening repetition of the same thing that has gone on for decades, each one can assure himself or herself of a passport to heaven. I can't imagine an idea more senseless, more stupid, indeed more insane than this. And in the process, what we are doing is we are shutting the door against immense possibilities. I believe there is a tremendous blessing, an incomparable advantage to belong to a true church. I believe there is a blessing to be able to participate in true worship. But if all that the worship or experience does to you is to induce sleep in you, or if the effect is not so powerful, to induce only boredom and weariness in you, then I don't know by what courtesy of consideration it can be called true worship. That's the reason why I thought I'll share these very simple, basic thoughts, and I could not have made it simpler than this. Remember, I've shared with you three Walsonian parables: parable of the painter, parable of the poet, parable of the housewife, in order that we may begin to think as to what constitutes church as the body of Christ. So, thank you, and I wish all of you not a very good day, but a very thoughtful and rich day. Goodbye for the present.